What's up, guys? Danny here from Geeks of Doom, and I am continuing with my trek through the MCU on our way to Black Widow on May 7th. And we are more than halfway now through Phase 1, the fourth film in the MCU, Thor from 2011, and it is 2021, and I feel like I have been passionately defending this film for a decade against totally unnecessary criticism. This movie does not fit into a lot of people's top tier MCU, but I kind of love it. I really enjoy Thor, and I think what I like most about it, and this could just be its placement in the MCU, this and Captain America First Avenger back to back were such palate cleansers after Iron Man 2. And again, I don't want to shit on Iron Man 2. It's fine. It's fun, but it's very messy. And it was a sequel, so you kind of felt that been there, done that formula. Then comes Thor, and you are just whisked away to this magical world of Asgard, gorgeous cinematography, gorgeous shots, things that you had never seen before in the MCU. The Rainbow Bridge, these giant golden castles, Heimdall and his incredible helmet pieces. Everything about Thor just felt different. It felt different in 2011, and watching it the other night, I still just genuinely love this movie. And I think it has to do a lot with its director, Kenneth Branagh. This is a guy who comes to the MCU from the world of Shakespeare. He's a classically trained Shakespearean actor and director. He did the 4.5-hour version of Hamlet in the early 90s, Henry V, of course. And here he is taking what is probably the most Shakespearean story in Marvel. You have a father who is getting older and seemingly about to die. He doesn't know which son to leave his empire to. One son gets cast off. The other son turns out to betray the empire. There's a lot of Macbeth. There's a lot of Hamlet to this. I haven't read a lot of Shakespeare since junior and senior year of high school. There is a lot of Hamlet to this. There's a lot of King Lear to this story. And Branagh just came off as the perfect guy to direct this movie. It's also kind of funny that back in 2011, nobody had ever really heard of Chris Hemsworth before. One of my favorite horror movies is Cabin in the Woods, which I believe was made before this, but didn't come out until after this movie. And he was kind of like a discovery, a new discovery, this young Australian actor. And he just, from the minute he's on screen, he oozes charisma. He's so funny, and he has so much personality. Speaking of unknowns, Tom Hiddleston, another guy who you don't really know. Go back to 2011, go back a decade. Nobody really knew who Tom Hiddleston was. He had a few IMDb credits to his name. And again, he was a kind of a no-name actor. And you took these two figures, Thor and Loki, Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston, and a decade later, they are two of the biggest actors on the planet. And their relationship, which starts in this film, would become one of the linchpins of the entire 23-film and growing saga of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So we start with Thor. His coronation as king is disrupted, and he takes it upon himself to lead the Lady Sif and the Warriors 3 to Jotunheim to battle the Frost Giants. And Loki is suspicious of this. My cat was suspicious of this too. Loki doesn't seem to be on board with this, and Loki actually calls Odin to rescue them. And Odin takes out his anger on Thor takes Mjolnir away, banishes him, throws Mjolnir to Earth, and basically, Thor has to become worthy again without any superpowers. And that takes us into the next phase of the story, which is a hilarious and genuinely fantastic fish out of water story. Watching Thor Odinson, that cat, man, she's crazy. Watching Thor have to, come to terms with the fact that he doesn't have the power of the gods, as he's wrestling with cops and medical personnel, and he's dealing with, obviously, Jane Foster, played by Natalie Portman, Darcy, who, of course, we just saw in WandaVision. She gets her introduction here, and, of course, the man who has produced the most beautiful family on Earth, Stellan Skarsgård, as Dr. Selvig. One of my favorite parts of this movie is Dr. Selvig's pure joy at meeting, like, the superhero, kind of like the mythology come to life that he read about as a kid growing up in, Scandinavia, and to see Thor in real life. And then he goes back to the children's books, and they're reading the children's books. And that ties into the idea that Thor mentions to Jane later in the movie about how, what you call magic, we call, or, like how magic and science go together very much in these films. To some people it's magic, to some people it's science. You hear that line actually reiterated in Captain America First Avenger by Johann Schmidt, the Red Skull. And I think it's also really interesting. I also love, one of my favorite Disney films of all time is The Sword and the Stone. And the whole Mjolnir there and Thor unable to lift it and, having to become worthy reminded me so much of The Sword and the Stone, and I think I loved that part of it as well. The film starting in Tonsberg adds to that MCU continuity that I mentioned about how you watch the later films, the Infinity Wars and the Endgame, and they still manage to make these little moments in Phase 1 movies that we've all kind of forgotten about because they were a decade plus ago. They make them important again. Coulson and S.H.I.E.L.D. are in this movie, and their involvement also, it's kept to a minimum as compared to Iron Man 2, where I felt like that was just another storyline that was just added on for effect. I just really love Thor. I think Thor is a deeply underrated film. I think that not enough people recognize it for the beautiful film that it is. It's so different from anything that's ever been in the MCU before it and even after it, until probably Guardians of the Galaxy, I would say. And again, Thor ties into the Guardians of the Galaxy because they have that cosmic aspect to them. And of course, Thor is now, later on, technically, he's now part of the Guardians, and he's going to be in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. But as far as blending humor, blending the human characters with the superhero characters, the mythology, and everything else about, I think this is probably the most underrated MCU film. I feel like I said, it's 2021 now. I feel like for a decade I've been telling people Thor's really good. It should be higher on your list, and everybody's response is, "Oh no, I don't like Thor. I don't like Thor. The first Thor is not that great." I genuinely love it. I think it's, in terms of complaints, like I said, I could, You want me to make a comment about Chris Hemsworth's dyed eyebrows? Fine. I didn't like his dyed blonde eyebrows. But aside from that, I don't really have many complaints about this movie. I think it's such an easy watch. And it's one of my favorites. Definitely one of my favorites of Phase 1. And probably one of my favorites of the overall MCU. That's it. A nice short reaction to Thor. Oh, last thing I want to mention, because I've made a big point of saying that I want to get a movie going with Edward Norton and Terrence Howard as the people replaced in the MCU. Well, let's add Josh Dallas to that. He is Fandral, one of the Warriors 3. He is replaced in the sequel, Thor: The Dark World, by... Is it Zach Levi? He's replaced. He was only in this one movie, which I found interesting. But, so he can join up with Terrence Howard and Edward Norton in their MCU The Forgotten movie that I'm making in my head. But aside from that, like I said, really enjoy this movie. I think it adds so much. These are characters that are going to come back time and time again and that are going to be important in not just Thor movies, but in other MCU movies, Avengers movies, and so on. Yeah. So, oh, I also forgot, Hawkeye has his understated debut. Very small, quick role for Jeremy Renner. You see him on screen maybe twice. He actually doesn't do anything. He just kind of makes a quip about how he's rooting for Thor because Thor is kicking ass. The post-credit scene introduces us to the Tesseract, the first of the Infinity Stones that we will see. And then, of course, immediately after this film, Captain America, First Avenger, the Tesseract is the main weapon involved. And that is something else that we'll learn much more about multiple movies later when we get to Captain Marvel. And it makes its appearance in Captain Marvel as well. So that's it for my review of Thor. If you were looking to hear somebody bash Thor, you came to the wrong place. I will defend this movie against all haters. Coming up next, tomorrow, I will be reviewing Captain America, The First Avenger, another movie that is totally different than anything in the MCU, and that makes it quite charming. And then, tomorrow night, my son and I are going to watch The Avengers, the original, the movie that started it all, really, the movie that proved the concept. $1.5 billion worldwide. The MCU was an unstoppable juggernaut at that point. We're going to watch that. We're going to rewatch it tomorrow. So you can see my review of that coming up probably on Friday, maybe Saturday. And that's it. So this has been Danny from Geeks of Doom. And stay tuned for Captain America First Avenger tomorrow.